I've been sitting with this for a while now, and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to say it out loud. Not because it's uncomfortable, although it is, but because I know exactly what happens when you push back against a dominant narrative in sports media. You get labeled. You get dismissed. People decide you have an agenda before they've finished reading the first sentence. But I've watched this Cleveland Browns quarterback situation develop in real time, and the distance between what is actually happening and what is being reported as fact has grown so wide that staying quiet started to feel like its own kind of dishonesty. So let me just tell you what I see. Plainly, without the spin. In April, the Cleveland Browns held a 3-day voluntary veteran minicamp. 3 days. No pads, no live defense, no rookies pushing anyone for a roster spot. And I want you to really internalize what this event is on the NFL calendar, because understanding its purpose is everything. When a franchise brings in a new head coach, the league grants a small orientation window. The staff gets to introduce terminology, build a common language, establish the broad philosophical framework of their system. That is literally all it is. Todd Monken, the new head coach, stood in front of cameras after those sessions and told reporters exactly this. He called it a 40,000-foot view. His words, not mine. He was not evaluating quarterbacks. He was not drawing competitive conclusions. He was giving everyone a first orientation from altitude, and he was transparent about that. Now let me tell you what the national media did with that information, because what they did was something I genuinely struggle to categorize as honest analysis. Within hours of those sessions concluding, the confident proclamations were already flowing. Deshaun Watson had the inside track. Watson looked like a commanding veteran reclaiming his throne. Shedeur Sanders was falling behind. Some outlets went further and floated the possibility that Shedeur might not even hold the backup spot. That's the version that traveled. That's the version that got amplified from radio shows to podcasts to television segments, one outlet echoing another until the assembled noise started sounding like verified truth. And I kept asking myself the same thing, over and over. On what evidence? From 3 days of voluntary work in shorts? From a session the head coach himself described as preliminary orientation? How does that become a closed verdict? Here's the part that moves this from sloppy analysis into something more troubling. Because Monken didn't just call the session preliminary and leave it there. He went further than that, and what he said should have fundamentally redirected every serious reporter covering this story. He explained that the practice script actually gave Shedeur Sanders more overall repetitions. He noted that the particular structure of certain practice periods, heavier run play emphasis in specific windows, created a visual imbalance that didn't reflect the actual distribution of meaningful quarterback work. And then he said, the thing that I cannot understand why it didn't lead every single report, Shedeur Sanders went first in 11-on-11 team drills. First, on day 1. Monken said explicitly that the rotation would vary day by day and that no conclusions about depth chart standing should be drawn from a single day's rep sequence. None of that made it into the story that spread. Not the rep distribution context, not the run play explanation, not the fact that Shedeur went first in team drills. What made it into the story that spread was an image, Watson asserting veteran authority while the rookie scrambled to keep pace. That image traveled because it fit what certain people had already decided before they sat down to listen to the press conference. And the gap between what Monken actually said and what the coverage reported is not a subtle difference of interpretation. It is a specific, documentable choice about what to include and what to leave out. I need to tell you about something that happened in Miami because this moment illuminates who Shedeur Sanders actually is at his core, in a way that statistics and depth chart speculation cannot. He was down in Florida during the offseason, doing private training work. The quiet kind. The sunrise kind. Nobody filming it. Nobody amplifying it. Just a quarterback putting in invisible repetitions, because the work has to happen whether or not anyone is watching. And while he was doing that work, a content creator found him. A streamer looking for footage, looking to get Shedeur to throw some routes for social media content. Something shareable, something that would perform. And Shedeur's response was immediate. He essentially said, When you see a football in my hands right now, understand what that means right now. Minicamp is coming. Training camp is coming. I have a competition to prepare for. I'm not here for content. I want you to think about what that response actually costs him in the current media environment. Think about the institutional context pressing in from every direction. Deshaun Watson is owed $46 million by that franchise, regardless of who starts the season opener. That financial gravity doesn't just sit neutrally in the background. It creates momentum, organizational defensiveness, a subtle and sometimes not so subtle pressure toward justifying the commitment already made. Shedeur can feel that current. Any serious person in that building can feel it. And his response to that environment, in an off-season when he desperately needs visibility and momentum and positive press, is to turn down a content opportunity and go back to his footwork and his film and his route timing. That is character behaving consistently when no one is watching. And that kind of consistency, maintained specifically in the face of that specific institutional pressure, is exactly what you need in the fourth quarter of a January game when everything is actually on the line. Josh Cribbs said things about this situation that deserve to be treated with genuine seriousness. And I want to make sure you understand who Josh Cribbs is before I tell you what he said. This is not some fringe commentator with a platform and an agenda. This is one of the most beloved figures in the entire modern history of Cleveland football. A man who gave that city everything he had, physically and emotionally, for the entire span of his career. A man who earned credibility through sacrifice, through loyalty, through the kind of sustained commitment that fans in that city recognize and don't forget. When someone with that standing says uncomfortable things, you engage with them. What Cribbs said was direct. He wants Shedeur to receive a genuine evaluation. He wants to see what this quarterback can actually do when given a full offseason, a coaching staff that is truly invested in his development and organizational clarity about who the future belongs to, conditions that his entire first professional season never once provided. Consider what that first year actually looked like. Shedeur's rookie season unfolded inside a franchise in structural chaos. The ownership situation was in transition. The offensive line couldn't consistently protect him from pressure. The supporting cast was incomplete by any honest accounting. And yet, across 7 starts under those conditions, he competed at a level that earned Pro Bowl recognition. That is not a participation trophy. That is not a soft honor. That is a group of players and coaches looking at a rookie operating in a genuinely difficult environment and voting him in on merit. And somehow, consistently, he gets positioned in the coverage as the problem, the complication, the one with questionable professionalism. Meanwhile, the man who is owed $46 million and hasn't played meaningful football in nearly 2 years gets framed as the misunderstood veteran awaiting his proper redemption. I'm asking you to look at that contrast directly. Not to draw a particular conclusion, but to look at it directly and ask whose interests that particular framing serves, and why it keeps showing up everywhere. The Baker Mayfield reference from Cribbs hit differently than anything else I heard in this entire conversation. He didn't mention that name casually. He brought it with full intention, carrying everything it represents to Cleveland fans specifically. Mayfield was pushed out. The narrative turned against him. The patience expired before the conditions ever actually gave him a fair answer. And then he found an organization that believed in what he could do, and he won a Super Bowl. Cribbs was asking Cleveland a devastatingly precise question. Are you about to do this exact thing again? Are you going to let the sunk cost psychology around $46 million already spent, the organizational desire to justify the most expensive commitment in franchise history, the noise and the framing, and the repeated amplification of a conclusion formed before the evidence was gathered? Are you going to let all of that cost you something genuinely valuable before you ever gave it the environment to show what it actually is? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the defining question of what this franchise builds next. The financial argument for centering Watson gets made constantly, and I understand why it sounds logical on the surface. The money is gone regardless. The contract doesn't disappear based on who takes the first snap in September. So the framing runs. If you're paying him anyway, why not let him compete fully? I get the internal arithmetic of that. But here is what it refuses to account for. Every snap Watson takes is a snap that Shedeur is not taking. Development doesn't work the way a bank account works. You cannot defer the reps, hold them in reserve, and draw them down later when you decide you finally need them. A quarterback's development happens through specific repetitions, in specific competitive pressure, with specific coaching attention applied at a specific moment in the arc of his growth. That window doesn't stay open indefinitely while you sort out something else. The real price of building this competition around Watson's financial obligation isn't denominated in dollars. It's measured in the developmental arc of the quarterback who is supposed to represent the actual future of the franchise. That cost doesn't appear on any spreadsheet, which is perhaps why it keeps getting ignored by people who feel most comfortable when the analysis comes with numbers attached to it. The speculation about Shedeur potentially falling to third string on this depth chart is the most reckless overclaim in this entire coverage cycle, and I want to walk through exactly why. That conclusion is built almost entirely on the visual impression of 3 days of voluntary practice without pads, without live defense, and without competitive stakes of any kind. 3 days. The head coach explicitly said he had not named a starter. He explicitly said he would not draw competitive conclusions from an April voluntary session. He explained the rep distribution. He explained the run play periods. He told you Shedeur went first in team drills. And still, some voices produced a confident projection of third-string status. That is not a conclusion that grew from the evidence. That is a conclusion that existed before the evidence was examined, dressed up afterward with whatever fragments could be framed to make it resemble reasoning. It looks like analysis from a distance. It isn't. Here is something that should be receiving far more serious attention than it currently gets. Prediction markets. Environments where actual money creates real incentive for accuracy over entertainment, where being performatively wrong has genuine financial consequences, have this competition considerably tighter than the loudest Cleveland media voices would suggest. Watson leads, yes, but Shedeur carries a meaningful probability share that sophisticated observers with real financial stakes in being right are assigning to a fifth-round second-year quarterback in a competition that hasn't even reached full organized team activities yet. When people who cannot afford to be wrong for the sake of a compelling narrative tell you through their money that this race is genuinely alive, that information deserves to be treated as signal rather than ignored because it complicates the dominant framing. And then there is a purely schematic football question that I find genuinely puzzling in how little serious treatment it receives. Monken built one of the most dynamic offenses in the entire league in Baltimore, and the cornerstone of that architecture was Lamar Jackson, one of the most unique athletic talents the quarterback position has ever produced. A player whose legs reordered every defensive calculation on every snap, whose ability to threaten a defense across every possible dimension was the actual load-bearing structure of what Monken was building. Now look at who is competing in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders is explicitly not that style of quarterback. He wins through the pocket, through timing precision and structural accuracy and quick coverage recognition and clean delivery within a well-designed system. That is his game. Deshaun Watson at his best in Houston was a dual-threat player. The plays that made him extraordinary involved his legs changing the defensive math on down after down. If what Monken is now constructing in Cleveland centers pocket processing, timing efficiency, and structure-based accuracy as its primary operating principles, then the honest football question, the one that deserves a real answer, is whether Shedeur Sanders represents the better schematic fit for what this coaching staff is actually trying to build. That question deserves genuine football analysis. It is not receiving it. Cribbs made one more observation that I think might actually be the most important thing said by anyone in this entire conversation, and it went mostly unnoticed in the coverage. He brought up the new stadium. This genuine inflection point where, with the Watson contract beginning to recede toward the background of franchise history, Cleveland has a real opportunity to step into a new era with a new identity and a new face who represents what is being built rather than what already collapsed. A new building needs a new story, and the story that already exists around Shedeur Sanders has genuine weight to it. A quarterback disrespected at the draft in a manner that was publicly documented and widely watched. Who arrived at a building structurally unprepared to develop him? Who competed under legitimately brutal conditions and still earned Pro Bowl recognition? Who spent his offseason doing invisible work and turning down easy content because he had something more important to accomplish? Who showed up to voluntary minicamp, went first in team drills, and then watched the coverage declare the competition essentially resolved before training camp had started? That is an arc with real resonance. The kind of relationship between a quarterback and a city that doesn't just fill seats in a new building, but creates something that lasts across years and generations. But Cleveland only gets that story if the decisions being made are actually grounded in what the football evidence shows, rather than in what $46 million of institutional psychology emotionally demands. The competition hasn't reached full OTAs. Nobody has played under real pressure with real consequences attached to the outcome. The lights haven't come on yet. Everything that has been declared and projected and repeated at sufficient volume to take on the appearance of received wisdom has been projected from complete darkness. When the lights actually come on, when the huddle is real and the stadium is full and everything performative has been stripped away by the weight of actual consequence, that is when this story gets written for real. Don't let 3 April days in shorts write the ending for you. The people who are absolutely certain they already know what the answer is are going to have to sit with that certainty when the actual evidence arrives. And everything I've watched and analyzed and thought carefully about tells me the answer is going to be considerably more interesting than the version they've been working so hard to sell.